Brian Sweeney, the founder and chairman of Sweeney Vesti here in Wellington. Brian has spent a lot of his time considering what the New Zealand edge is and working through that in his Wellington-based consultancy, and being the co-producer of the terrific forum 7x7, which has run a number of times here in Wellington, the last one just a few months ago, which I was delighted to be involved with. Very challenging ways to bring out these ideas about what is distinctive about New Zealand and what is our particular contribution in the world. So that's what Brian's here to talk about. So a very warm welcome, please, for Brian Sweeney. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you, EMA. It's fantastic to be at Thrive. I was at an early Thrive in Auckland some years ago. It's a rock and roll business. Today, it was very nice of Kerry to reference the tour that I produced of the cultural ensemble of the African National Congress. When I moved to Wellington in 1980, I had a 7-year career as a show business producer, an agent and promoter, and we brought 60 people from, they were based in Namibia, when the ANC was an outlawed organisation. Nelson Mandela was still in prison, and of course with New Zealand's intense interest and investment in justice in apartheid South Africa, it was a very timely tour. They played to thousands and thousands of people throughout the country, and in fact one of my clients at the time, he was a client for 5 years, was Sam Hunt, who plays here on January the 20th with Leonard Cohen. Fantastic step up for Sam. Concert sold out, so and as a promoter, one's always pitching. My context for being here today is as an exporter, and that is my passion, to build a business from New Zealand around the world, and how we can integrate our local operations with our international operations and have a global 24/7 business by leveraging the very unique physical and indeed sort of psychic attributes of being a New Zealander. I'm going to start with 4 or 5 markers, as it were, philosophical markers that will build on the nuggets of wisdom I have about being an exporter. And the first is the philosopher Daniel Dennett said it was an occupational hazard being a philosopher to be continually asked the meaning of life. And so he constructed the soundbite that the secret of happiness is to find something bigger than yourself and then devote your life to it. And what he's really talking about is purpose. Life lived without purpose is not really a life that is lived. And the same might also be said for New Zealand. Lloyd Morrison has just launched a project. Lloyd, you'll probably know him through Infratil, Wellington Airport, and the New Zealand Flag project, which sought to reach into questions of national identity. And Lloyd's contention is that New Zealand doesn't have a purpose. It ambles along, it underperforms. The projections are in 2025, if we continue at the same rate of growth, that Botswana and Kazakhstan will have a higher GDP per person than New Zealand. And of course, we don't want this to happen, and the purpose of Thrive is to accelerate ourselves way past that point. So life with purpose. The second marker is reinvention. How you go from analog to digital, from local to global. How you reinvent yourself is a question that you should be asking yourself once a quarter, every day, that you need to interrogate what you're doing in terms of how you can do it differently and better. It's a constant process. The Japanese call it Kaizen, or continuous improvement. The next marker, Paul Winter talked before about wisdom and the need for making wise and the right decisions, and I simply pick up on what Edward de Bono said, that there's no point in being brilliant at the wrong thing, and sometimes as a country the decisions that we have have fitted completely into this structure. The next one you'll be familiar with, Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, a profoundly important book because it showed how small things can change the world. Gladwell's contention is that 5% of a community, of a population, can cause seismic change. And the next marker is this guy, Richard Werman, who I work in the communications business, and if I have a sort of like an intellectual mentor, it would be Richard Werman, who invented the field of information architecture, how you make complex stuff simple and understandable, how you create access points to information and data, and how you use language to change the conversation. He also delves into the power of words and how simple shifts in single words can change the entire context. So take a word like small, which is how New Zealand often thinks of itself. On John Key's election night speech, he mentioned twice in his speech that New Zealand's a small country. I hope a speechwriter or there's a spell checker that deletes that word out of all of his speeches, because if you and this is I guess the heart of my thinking and stories and thesis about New Zealand, that we need to overcome this notion of smallness. And so if you invert the word and you think of us as rare, then you have an entirely different conversation, an entirely different platform on which to launch your New Zealand story. So John Key made much during his election campaign about the bike ride he took as a child down the road in Christchurch when he was growing up in a state house, and saw how the other half lived, as it were. And obviously the question came up in his mind, well, how do I get there? How do I take myself out of this position I'm in and go to that place, as it were? And I have a similar childhood story resulting in a different question. But the inquiry behind the question has directed a lot of my life, work and thinking. And I grew up in a small Waikato dairy farming town 20 miles from Hamilton. There's a whole string of towns around Hamilton that produce milk powder, and this was in the 1960s. I mean, it was phenomenally boring. I mean, the orthodoxy of New Zealand under Keith Holyoake, and we didn't get television till I was about 6 or 7 years old, and it was black and white and one channel. So it was a very sort of closeted life. But I had the sense that there was something bigger out there. And I remember looking up at the stars one night, thinking, existential questions for a 7-year-old. Who are we? What are we? And indeed, why are we? And the town that I lived in, I guess, had a purpose, in that it was a dairy farming town that had the world's biggest dairy factory. And so we had the sense of the mission of the town was to send its stuff to the world. And I guess the export gene was put into me at that point. So it raised questions about, in my mind, about where we're located in the world, and there was the sense of, in New Zealand, of invisibility, small, isolated, distant, remote, insignificant, irrelevant, and these things, I think, led to a low sense of national esteem and to fundamental lack of purpose. I remember 1972, England entered the European Community, and this was sort of catastrophic for the town. We thought that life was over. So I had the sense that there was something big out there that we needed to get on top of. And of course, I guess the role models of that time were Peter Snell, who came to school after his gold medal winning performances, Edmund Hillary. There were heroes who had gone out and taken on the world and knocked the bugger off, as it were. So there was the sense of, we could do it, but none of the dots were connected until some fast forward 30 years later. I was driving a guy called Kevin Kelly, who at that time was the founding editor of Wired magazine. I'd met him at a conference in San Francisco, and when he was in New Zealand, we spent a day together, and we went for a drive out to the beach at Karikari in West Auckland, where the piano was filmed, and he was pumping me full of questions about New Zealand and wanting to really understand what the drivers were and the motivators and what the dreams were of New Zealand. And I made the statement to him that I said I didn't know why it was, but for some reason, I had the sense that there was a disproportionately large number of New Zealanders who had changed the world in some way, who had influenced the world well beyond our capabilities. And he said, like who? So I rattled off the sort of the top names. Obviously, Ernest Rutherford, possibly certainly the greatest New Zealand scientist. In the pantheon of world scientists, Rutherford's always going to be there. Extraordinary man. Edmund Hillary, of course. When 5 or 6 years ago, when they discovered the body of Mallory on Everest, the world's media rang up Sir Ed, had his number listed in the Auckland phone book. You could ring up 018 and ask for Ed Hillary, and in his and they were asking him, well, what do you think, Ed? Do you think that you were the first one there? How do you feel about the possibility that Mallory had beaten you? And he said in his sort of laconic New Zealand way, it's the getting down that counts. And so this is another nugget for New Zealand exporters. Generally, we can talk our way into any situation, but talking our way out of it is an entirely different point of view. So another landmark, of course, New Zealand, the first country in the world to give women the vote. Kate Shepherd and her suffragists. There's a bunch of Wellington people who I believe have changed the world in some way. This guy, Joseph Nathan, who set up his business in Lambton Quay and a factory in Bunnythorpe and changed the way in which babies in the world were fed. He invented a process in which milk was converted to powder. And he was a marketing genius also, not only in manufacturing and technology and obviously the logistics of transport at this stage. And he was he'd take the ship to London and he had factories and offices there. And he was also a world innovator in marketing and created the foundation for the direct marketing industry in the world. His story also underlines the importance of branding, because as we know, Glaxo has gone on to be a world famous brand, and GlaxoSmithKline is one of the world's top pharmaceutical companies. Originally they were going to call the company Lacto, so clearly he had the presence of mind to say that's just not going to fly in the world. We need a name, a word, a brand that can scale our invention and product to the world. This next person, Alan MacDiarmid, one of our great scientists, won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago and invented technology that enables electricity to be conducted through plastic. Great story. He was a janitor at Weir House. After he left school, he couldn't afford to go to university, so he became a janitor. So all I say is that, next time you run into the person who's cleaning your bathrooms or toilets, just look at them differently, because they could be going on to win a Nobel Prize. This next person, Maurice Wilkins, our second Wellington Nobel Prize winner. He was the third man of DNA with Crick and Watson. He left Wellington when he was 4, lived on Kelburn Parade for a short period of time, and it raises interesting questions as to who qualifies to be called a New Zealander. But Wilkins, and he never returned, Wilkins passionately believed in his New Zealandness and how it contributed to his discovery. This next person, Catherine Mansfield, Tinakori Road, changed the way in which stories were written. This next person, Nancy Wake, born in Palliser Road, Roseneath, third generation New Zealander. Her mother was sought after as a lover by Honi Heki. She went to Sydney when she was 2 and has never been back, kept a New Zealand passport. Nancy lives in London and she's 93. She was the most decorated woman of World War II and ran an army of 7,000 resistance fighters in the south of France. The film Charlotte Gray is based on her life. Extraordinary woman. This next person is Bill Pickering, lived at 8 Roxburgh Street in Mount Victoria. He ran the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, which put America into space in the 60s, just after the Russians had done it. Extraordinary man. And again, what was his role? It was project management. He was the guy between the American military, the presidency, and this sort of mad Nazi rocket scientist, Werner von Braun, who they needed to build the rockets. Extraordinary man. So, by this time, Kevin and I had driven halfway around the North Island because the list of New Zealanders who've changed the world is quite a long one. And so he said to me that New Zealand was actually a really easy place to understand. And I thought, well, this is going to be a eureka moment for me. And he said, in biology, because Kevin, as a founding explainer of the internet, as it were, equates everything on the internet to biology. And he says and biology is the science that explains why things go up like that and down like that. He says that in biology, change happens on the edge of the species, of the community, on the fringes, the margins, the edges of anything is where you get innovation, creativity, and ideas that go to influence the centre. And so there was my sort of one-word equity for New Zealand, edge. And we've built a whole story around this. I mean, this is not rocket science, this is storytelling, because of course edge is a metaphor and a term that is used in many different media. And I mean, you read the newspaper every day, you'll find a headline with the word edge in it. And there's even there's a book called The Deviant's Advantage, how fringe ideas create mass markets. Now, that's a great challenge for New Zealand. How do we create mass markets for New Zealand products and services and people? And you'll see on the index the various references to where edge lives. Edge is not, a nice, easy, relaxed, comfortable metaphor. This cover from the Bulletin was from about 5 or 6 years ago. The New Zealand Institute has just released this paper called The Economy on the Edge. So it involves danger and risk and as well as possibility and innovation. So, and finally, because we live on an island and we look out to sea, we see this horizon line, and so we're constantly living with this edge of possibility right around us. So this is how we've summed up, our proposition. This is an ad that we've done. Every world needs an edge. There's a reason why many of the world's leading innovators, scientists, engineers and so on come from New Zealand, discover the New Zealand edge. My friend and partner in this, Kevin Roberts, and I have created this website about 10 years ago. It's, you find it at nzedge.com. We have managed to inculcate this metaphor into a number of different forums. This is Time magazine's coverage of New Zealand. It's been said to me this is a very Pākehā view of the world. What is the role of Māori? And I think that is, incredibly important question. Michael Parakowhai, an artist, believes that New Zealand is the centre of the world, and through Māori myths and legends and so on, this is an entirely sort of plausible story. It's a great story to tell. And what you see with these kōwhaiwhai patterns is the dynamic between the internal and the external, the edge and the centre, and this is very important to manage and cultivate. What does Edge say about our tourism positioning? 100% pure. John Key's been just made himself Minister of Tourism, which I think is fantastic. It's a $20 billion industry. Our tourism marketing is the only overt marketing we do. I mean, there is other stuff that does happen, but in terms of above the line paid advertising, what we put out there is 100% pure New Zealand. And it's been a brilliantly successful campaign, and long may it run, but my concern is the dissonance between, pure from an external point of view and pure from an internal point of view, because it's possible for a tourist to be sold the dream of pure, arrive at Auckland Airport, pick up the Herald and say, what have I come to? Margaret Mead stitched the whole thing together for me. I found this quote from her of the 1950s. It's the role of New Zealand's young men and women to go out and help run the world. So we have created this website, newzealandedge.com. The hero stories that I've talked about, there's a whole collection of them there. Another thing that we have wanted to do, a key observation, is how do we connect with diaspora? I mean, it was clear that so many people have left New Zealand. Many of them have slammed the door going, and they've set up life somewhere else in the world, possibly with no intention of returning. What a waste. I mean, how do we connect with these people? How do we involve them in our economy and in our conversation? This is a picture of a group of Wellingtonians we feature on the website. We've got heroes and we've got contemporary achievers who have influenced in the world in some way. we've tracked these New Zealanders throughout the world. We believe that there's 5 million New Zealanders in the world. This is another example of how you change the conversation. We're not 4 million people, we're 5. Because there's all these people overseas who we must include in this conversation, and how they bring their expertise and their affluence and their influence to bear. There are New Zealanders in something like 792 international locations. It's amazing where people are. They're in every country of the world. And so what we have done is tried to emotionally connect people together, cluster them together, and to create a story about our culture and our conversation. So this is about how we locate ourselves in the world, and in fact, where do you do it? And if you're a business, your choices in terms of where you locate and put your points of presence, how you dot that around the globe. And so for me, my discovery about where we locate ourselves was in New York, and apart from the obvious attractions of New York as an amazing city, we needed to choose somewhere to be an international hub. And I guess, this is again about patterning and language. NYNZ, if you start a sequence that starts with A, B, A, C, A, D, A, D, and so on, there's something like 900 combinations. You've just got NYNZ next to each other. And so this is part of the richness of storytelling. There's a book being published called The Island at the Centre of the World. I mean, if I was to write a book, it might be called The Islands at the Edge of the World. And even to stretch it even further, somebody called this geographic promiscuity. What were the Dutch doing in 1642? Abel Tasman was sailing around our seas naming New Zealand, and the Dutch were in New Amsterdam setting up their city to run world commerce. So I've got this t-shirt, I've got this brand called NYNZ. That sort of partly explains my life to myself. I travel between Wellington and New York, where New York is now. Tough town, but phenomenally exciting and a great launching pad. In fact, this is the Hotel Wellington in New York. There are 43 towns, cities called Wellington throughout the world, and in some way, as part of Wellington City's outreach, we should be embedding into these places. This is just a map of locations in the United States in which we've done business. We project manage for clients. We do all sorts of projects. We've got offices now in New Zealand, and New Zealand is incredibly important. Auckland, Wellington, not only for doing business for New Zealand clients, but also as a sort of back office for doing work overnight. And so here are 6 lessons for exporters. Add a zero. Rod was talking before about growing 15%, and my thing is, how do you scale your business? What are the objectives? And if you're a webmaster and you've got a website that's doing 1 million visits a year, how do you get it to 10 million? I mean, how do you add a zero to whatever it is that you're doing? Scale is very important to address. How big or how small we should be. Well, not how small, but how big. What are the ideal sizes we should be? Somebody once said to me that the first ideal size for any organisation is 16 people. That's an ideal critical mass. The next is 400, and the next is 10,000. So a 10,000 person company is easier to run than one that's 6. So scale is very important. World class is no longer enough. I mean, Skype came out of Latvia. I mean, world class is everywhere. We need to be world changing, and this comes back to these people that I've referenced before, and I mean, it's in New Zealand's sort of gene pool to be world changing. It's just that I think it's been suppressed for a very long time, and what we need to do is to articulate this sense of achievement to motivate ourselves as a country. Number 3, the world is 24/7. Sometimes we work 24/7 literally, but more particularly, it's a great time zone for working with New York, for Asia, and so on. Europe's a little more difficult. As I say, whenever you're talking to Europe, someone's been drinking. Be resource, resilient and relentless. It's very hard work. It's the old story, if I had have known what was involved, might I have attempted that? And our answer is always yes, but you need really strong supply lines. You need to bounce back from the obstacles and the hurts and the failures and those sorts of things that you do experience along the way. Number 5, just because you've watched an episode of Friends doesn't mean to say you understand the mind of your average New Yorker. So one's reading of nuance and language and culture is very, very important. And you have to get yourself into the society. New York is a very structured, hierarchical, programmed, gridded sort of society, has very definite social seasons and protocols. You have to write thank you notes after a dinner party. Now the thing is, in New Zealand, no one ever invites you to issues invitations to social functions. So, but even in New York, the social life is very, very important. And how you can't just rock up there and say, "Hi, I'm a Kiwi, come to a barbie." I mean, it just doesn't play. So you have to spend a lot of time observing the local culture and work out how to position your New Zealandness. Now, if you're a software company, your New Zealandness may mean nothing at all. My wife Jane says, "Look, I can look the part, but as soon as I open my mouth, they can tell I'm from Balclutha." So you need to have your New Zealand story worked out, how intrinsic it is to what you do. This is a video. We sent our crew out into Columbus Circle to talk to some New Yorkers.
Where's New Zealand? Okay.
Oh, that's New Guinea, right?
Yeah. Over here? I can't remember if it's over here or if it's over there. I can't remember now. Let's see. New Zealand is probably here, I believe. There?
New Zealand is right, I believe it is, that's the question. It's either here or here, I'm not really sure.
New Zealand is around here. Yes.
Australia, New Zealand is here.
Yeah. New Zealand?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've made a little small book. I mean, people give out business cards, but this is a book, just of pictures of sort of beautiful New Zealand. It's called New Zealand, and it's by Sweeney Vesty, and this is our own take on New Zealand. A lot of people know they know more about New Zealand now than they did 10 years ago, and the perceptions are very, very positive. Generally, I mean, you can say people from from New Zealand, and people say, if you say, "Hey, I'm from the edge of the world," they say, "Wow, that's amazing." And again, how do you shift the language and the conversation? So just a couple of slides to finish. I took this picture at Raumati over the weekend. You may not be able to see. There's a man in the middle. It was just like this stunning day, and he's out there on a surfboard, just sort of paddling along. And is this a metaphor for New Zealand? The man alone at sea, heading for the horizon to create connection with the world, or is this? I mean, one of the extraordinary things about New Zealand is the lifestyle and its connection with nature. I mean, this is an extraordinary, wonderful place to live and to be, but constantly you have your eye to this horizon, and what's over that horizon is the rest of the world, where we need to be in all these places, exporting, doing business, bringing them here. And that's really the story of my journey. Thank you very much.